Hey guys, welcome to Art with Ian. Today we're going to be talking about creating shadows using the multiply layer mode. Alright, let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so what I've got here, before the video I went ahead and designed a character and did all the local color work on it. So basically everything that I wanted to have done to it, texture, pattern, color, everything that I wanted just without shadow or light applied. So what we're going to talk about here is how using the multiply layer over the top of all of this will allow the integrity of my design to show through the shadows, just like in real life. Shadows don't actually cover what's there, they just put it into shadow, which makes it darker. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here and create a new layer. You can either click down here or you can hit Control-Shift-N as the hotkey. Create a new layer, and I'm going to call this Shadow 1. And what I want to do is I want to turn this layer into a clipping mask. So I'm going to clip this layer by holding Alt on the keyboard, down, and hovering between the two layers. You'll see that the icon changes from a hand to that little square with the down arrow. When it changes to that square with the down arrow, you're going to go ahead and click, and that will lock this layer, the new layer you've made, to the original layer that you had. And now what's great is I can go ahead and paint my shadows, or I can paint anything I want on this layer, and it will never go outside of the mask. It'll never go outside of my initial creature painting here. So what I've got is a warm gray. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come up here and get a gray kind of like this. And what I want warm shadows and cool light. So it's kind of it's daytime, so the sky is really it's blue and there's a lot of cool light. It's not late enough in the evening for the sun to have warmed up the light enough. So warm shadows. When the light is cool, typically the shadows are warm. When the light is warm, typically the shadows will be cool. So we're going to come up here somewhere in and around here and get this mostly gray but a little bit warmed up. The saturation is about 10%. The value is probably about close to that too, maybe 20%. And hit OK. And I'm going to use my kind of like a chalky brush that I have. I'm using the bracket keys on my keyboard to enlarge my brush size, and what I want to do first on this first pass is just find the biggest shapes of shadow. Now what I've done to help show you what my lighting setup is I've created an arrow. So this is what lighting I want to use. I want to have the light coming down over my right hand shoulder at this kind of an angle. So his chin would cast a shadow, and you'd get, oh, I got to set it to multiply. That's what this is all about. Multiply. So his chin would cast a shadow, something like this, maybe a little less angle on it than that, but I'll be coming through and pushing some of the shadows back with a soft eraser eventually, so it doesn't have to be exactly where I want it right now. So there's going to be a cast shadow coming off his chin. His nose is protruding, not quite like a human's, but he's kind of like a little bit reptilian in his design. But definitely all underneath his nose, I want a shadow, and then it's going to cast down. See my angle there on the light? It's going to cast down somewhere in here. Not as probably far as it would if it was a human nose, which I might just tie it into all the shadows around his lip there. For now, we'll just try this. And then his brow here is going to be in shadow because it's turning down into his eye, and then it's going to cast a shadow on his eye. Now I'm going to leave some of that eye out of the shadow just because I want to hit it with like a gleam eventually. So that's more for like an artist. It's highly possible that this brow would cast the whole eye into shadow, but for the sake of the artistic side of it, the way I want it to look, I'm leaving part of that eye out of shadow. So this brow here would cast a shadow on the eye, and then this shadow or this brow's turning under there. Here, the brow, I want to show that the form is turning. This is all about showing your shapes and forms. So this is turning here into the bridge of his nose area, and then the bridge of the nose area there. And then this might have a little shadow, and eventually when we do the video on the light, we'll see how the light interacts with all these shapes and forms as well. And then his hair, since we've got this angle, it's not protruding very far here, but then we've got this tuft here that comes out, so I want to show that that's kind of what's happening there. This doesn't have to be like perfect or anything, I just want the feeling to happen, kind of a thing. And then these are standing up pretty straight. I could go across the whole head, I don't know, we'll see. I'll decide here in a moment. For now, we'll just block that in, and then this whole side of his head here is in shadow. It might look kind of neat to have like a couple strands of his hair crossing this plane like this. I don't know, we'll see. And then under his lid here, go into shadow. Eventually we'll be getting light onto some of this stuff too, where the stuff catches light. That'll be in the next video. Under this ear, the top of his ear there, and then this kind of bit here, this would be in shadow here, like so. All of this. And now, when you're doing shadow, you're designing shapes. The shadow shapes are, it's not just putting stuff into shadow. You actually want to try and design shapes with your shadows. So it's like one part, what's the actual anatomy telling you, and then one part, how can I make the anatomy something that allows for good shadow shapes, or put the lighting in a place where the anatomy sells good shadow shapes. So this here on your cheekbones, since he's kind of a cross between human and like a reptile thing. He's an alien creature, actually from a book I'm writing, and so he's pretty humanoid. In the front of your face here, you've got like a pretty flat plane on the front of your cheekbone, and so I want it to feel like this form turns pretty sharply down in here. So all of this is going to go into shadow here. And then this here is your lips kind of muzzle out a bit. And so this can go into shadow here. I'm going to bring my brush size down with bracket left. This can go into shadow. And then some shadow on the bottom of his lip. The bottom of his bottom lip, that is. Bottom of his chin, the form is turning. Where that form starts to turn goes into shadow. Let's get the rest of his ear into shadow. Actually, it might be kind of cool to get a cast shadow of his head on his ear, like so, kind of like that. Cast shadows are a really powerful tool for making sure things look more realistic, because we have a lot of hard cast shadows in reality. So if all of your shadows have the same type of edges, soft edges, if all your shadows have soft edges, then it won't look very realistic. If all of your shadows have hard edges, it will look more kind of like pop art, and so on. So now I'm going to go and do the semitone, the kind of the halfway between where some of these forms turn, just by applying a little bit less pressure, blowing my brush size up a little bit, just to make some of these forms that I don't want hard shadows on feel a little more gradual, like they're turning into the light or turning away from the light. Okay, I think this is probably okay for the first shadow pass. So just with this first pass here, if I turn this off, should probably get a little shadow happening along this line here, like to show he's got some kind of tendon, you know, some tendons and things going on here. So if I turn this off, you'll see we started with that, and now we've pushed that shadow. He looks like it looks like I'm turning a light source on when I turn the shadow on. We haven't even done light. That'll be the next video. But let's just do one more shadow pass for this video, and to see kind of how because I usually do 2 shadow passes and then I come in with my lights. So I'm going to create a new layer, and by clicking on my local color layer first and then creating the layer, it automatically clipped it for me. But I do want it over the top of shadow 1, so I'm going to just click on it and drag it up over the top, and then I'm going to name it shadow 2 and set it to multiply. And over here we're going to grab a new color. We're going to go just slightly darker. You don't have to go a bunch darker to get your shadows deeper. If you go too far, it'll be really hard to sell the transition between the 2 shadow passes. It's better to do like a 3rd and 4th gradually getting darker shadow pass than it is to try and get too much done all at once. So I'm just going to go subtly darker and slightly grayer, because as we go farther into shadow we get less color, less warmth, less cool. So I'm going to get in here a little bit closer and deepen these brows. I want these brows to feel like they've got a pretty heavy, like he's heavy browed. And I'm going to deepen a little bit of the shadow here. You'll notice I'm leaving just a tiny bit of the original shadow color there, because I want it there to feel like there's bounce light coming up. And on the lighting video, we'll talk about bounce light. We'll talk about bounce light, we'll talk about the main light source, and we'll talk about reflected light. Well, ambient light. Bounce light is reflected light. We'll talk about ambient light, which is kind of light that comes from around the character, not the main light source, which is the sun. More like light from the sky around the character, which is a great way for redefining your shape and form in the deepest shadows where things start to get kind of lost. Which, if you're going for a look like, if you want lost edges and stuff, that can be cool. But that's not what I'll be doing for this guy. So I'm just I'm defining some of the stuff in my sketch as well with now that Shadow Pass 2 is coming in, because eventually the end result that I'm going for eventually is to paint the sketch out of this. Sometimes I don't do that. Sometimes I want it to feel a little bit more hand-drawn or whatever. There's a little bit more of a drawing feel to your work when you leave the sketch in, but I'm not doing that. I'm going to deepen this shadow here to show the brows catching more light right there at the edge. Push this into shadow here. And then I'll let that kind of sit up out of the shadow just that little bit. I'll put a little shadow down at the bottom to help show the form, but just want that to feel kind of like it's popping out that little bit. These shadows can get a little deeper here. Just along there. I forgot to actually put a shadow on the side of his hair in the first pass. I'm just going to use this color now that I'm using and just do it with this. I think it'll be fine. I can always erase back a bit with a feathered eraser if I feel like it got too dark on me. But it seems to be working. This is kind of turned hard away from the light anyways because it's standing up. And so it makes sense for the shadow to be pretty deep on it. I will have to erase back some of this where the forms are turning into the light though, make sure that it feels like that's what's happening. I'm going to deepen this shadow under the nose up a little bit. A little shadow there. Deepen this shadow just under the lip there, and where the two lips come together. Get a little bit more shadow in there. Put a little shadow under here to help show that this cheek bone is actually protruding out over the jaw. And I can deepen this a little bit here, closer to the neck where the shadow would be deeper, and then I can kind of feather it out as I go. Get a little deeper with this shadow. Really what this is about is just building up to a point where you feel like you've created enough depth in the shapes to sell what your character is supposed to actually look like in three-dimensional space. There's also I hinted at some texture here with my sketch, which I think he feels like some texture would work really well on him, just the kind of creature he is. So now that I'm doing my shadows, texture, the way we see texture comes from it being tactile, and so where it juts up into space, it has to catch light and therefore has to catch a shadow. So I'm just kind of trying to think about some loose ideas, kind of just trying to be really random here and just kind of scribble in the idea of some of these areas where his flesh might be kind of bumpy, wrinkly, kind of just not like smooth, you know. Also where this eye turns down would really catch quite a bit of shadow as well, because it's a round eyeball. So I'll do like that. And then we'll just come in and hit this with the feathered eraser to make sure that it feels soft and a little less grainy than it does right now. Put a couple folds in the creases and crevices in his eyelids, because anything that kind of moves, like your eyelids open and close, and so they wrinkle up when they're open because there's extra material there that's enough to close. So you want to kind of try and make it feel like that there's, you know, more than one fold, so that it looks like something that could actually move over the top of his eyeball. did hint at like a little bit of a some kind of a, to show this part of the mouth here that kind of muzzles out around the cheeks and nose. So maybe I should help define that with shadow just a little bit. I don't want it to be pronounced. I don't want it to look weird. But just a little bit of shadow to help make it feel like it exists, because eventually when the sketch goes away, if I don't reinforce it with some kind of amount of shadow, then that detail will just be gone. A little bit of shadow where these two, the nostril connects to the main cartilage. Keep going with that bit of texture. These lines are quite loose, but I'm not being overly, I'm not going super dark with them either, so they kind of, they're vague enough to not feel like we need to see exact detail in them. They're just kind of a suggestion. Put a shadow here. This is obviously turned away from that light, which is coming down like that, so this here is turned away. Same with this one. And I believe that this right here, this would be kind of like an occlusion shadow, because the turn going into the plane change of the temple and the brow line here would just kind of stop light from getting in there. So I'm going to put a shadow here. Also, it's just going to help make sure that this detail exists when the sketch goes away, like I mentioned with some of the other stuff. Something like this. Okay. So that's brush down. Do a little bit more texturing. Probably not going to finish texturing it in this video, because this video is about creating shadow with the multiply layer mode, not about sitting here and noodling texture. But it's cool to see maybe just a little bit of like, it's part of it. It's part of the process, you know. This is what you can do using the multiply mode, creating shadow. You don't have to just stick to maybe what you would think of as traditional shading when you're, you know, shading a face. You think of just trying to shade like the side of the face and maybe the nose and the eyes or something, but shading covers selling texture as well. It's really, shading and lighting covers selling everything to do with shape and form, period. Might get a little bit of shadow there, a little bit of shadow here. Deepen this shadow when it's turning just right in here a little bit. And this right in here. And this where it turns away from where the ear cartilage turns down. Alright, I think this is probably just about enough to sort of say we've talked about the blending mode like we were supposed to. This might create a little indent here where these two pieces break apart. The cartilage kind of moves apart, you know. So real quick before I end this video, I'm gonna grab the I don't want to do that with a brush though. I'm gonna get my eraser and get the soft airbrush, the soft eraser brush, and some of this stuff, some of this I want to just subtly push back. So I'm going to start with layer shadow pass 1, the first thing I did, and I'm going to sort of make a little bit, some subtle little changes in the semitones and stuff here and there. Make this nose feel like it's, the shadow's getting slightly less potent as it gets farther away from the subject. I'm going to ease this shadow back, same reason here, because it's, you know, the chin, as it gets farther away from the point of the shadow cast, the shadow gets less potent. Then I'm going to go over to shadow 2 and kind of do the same sort of thing here. Just very slightly easing back my shadow work, making it all feel like it's nestled in there pretty nicely, evening things out a little bit. Like if I see some of these textures that I did on the face, if I see an area that feels a little too scribbly or too attention grabbing, once I've zoomed out, it's easier to tell. I can just kind of ease it back that little bit, push it into the mix of everything and get it to kind of feel like it's all living together. And oh yeah, the eye real quick, like I mentioned, I want this eye to feel soft, hard edges in the shadows on the eyes, not so good at selling the eyeball feel. Okay, so I think this is probably pretty good for getting through, just showing how powerful the multiply layer mode is for creating our shadows. In the next video, we're going to take the same character, we're just going to add light to him. So make sure you tune in for that one, and I'll see you guys in that one.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and share it with your friends. Make sure you ring that bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.